Hello, this is Cody Decker, and this presentation is Twitter use by journalists. Now, we know how social media has changed the field of journalism for the journalists themselves as well as consumers, and how consumers get their news. Mostly it's done by social media these days, so we're going to tackle mostly Twitter in this presentation, as well as how people are getting their news in 2017. So what is Twitter? Well, according to TechTarget.com, Twitter is a free social networking microblogging service that allows registered members to broadcast short posts called tweets. Tweets may include hyperlinks and are limited to 140 characters due to the constraint of Twitter's short message service delivery system. Now, in layman's terms, it's a quick post, very short, and you're only limited to 140 characters. So in terms of journalists using Twitter, it's used to do highlights of news, to post the basics of a news story rather than posting an entire long article. So let's talk about media platforms and social media. We already mentioned how big social media is for journalists and consumers today. This is going to take more of the consumer side of it. Now, the Pew Research Center in the Department of Journalism already did their 2017 study. 67% of Americans get their news from social media. That's an 18% increase since 2012. 74% of Twitter users get news from the Twitter site. Now, that's big because we're talking about a lot of users using Twitter in the sense of getting news. We're not talking about commentary. We're not talking about things that are, more of a conversation. This is hard news that people are getting on Twitter. As far as using social media sites, 26% of U.S. adults get news from 2 or more social media sites. Now, that's important because usually you're talking about a consumer being dedicated to possibly one source of media and they stick to it. Well, now you're seeing Facebook, you get a lot of news. You're looking at Twitter, having a lot of news. And even Snapchat now has gone to an area where they are producing news as well in a very highlighted platform. And news users on Twitter were mostly males, 53%, and mostly people in the 30 to 49-year-old age range use Twitter. That's at 43%. So what's my personal experience with Twitter? Now, it started as a personal Twitter account as a high school Twitter. So you're talking about at my age as a high school teenager, just using Twitter as any high schooler would. Commentary, opinion, that kind of stuff. Now, as a journalist, my Twitter is now strictly professional. I keep it to when I'm covering events as a broadcaster or my shows, advertising my shows, things like that. As a consumer, I mostly use Twitter for sports news, and they come right to my phone through notifications. Now, I follow Rich Cimini, who's the Jets beat writer, Adam Schefter, who's an NFL insider, and I get all the NFL news on my team as well as the league itself coming right to my phone. So I am a consumer on Twitter as much as a journalist. Now, mostly I use Twitter as my source of news. I also use Facebook from time to time as hyperlinks do pop up through my Facebook profile. So what are the issues with Twitter use by journalists? Well, the most important issue and the biggest issue is the importance of being right or being first. And journalists have to deal with this on a daily basis. Journalists posting information for the sake of entertainment rather than being correct. Are journalists trying to make a name for themselves by simply posting something that would be funny, would be an eye catcher to their consumers, rather than being correct? And journalists engaging in commentary rather than reporting news. Now, we do see it. Some journalists are very controversial in that they like to get involved with their consumers and be in a bit of a conversation, which is fine. However, they're doing that more than reporting straight news. So let's dive into this more, the issue of being right or being first, which is more important. Now, Ali Velshi is an ex-CNN anchor, and a Quartz article stated this quote that I thought was very true. Accuracy is always supposed to trump speed in reporting, but it's hard to be the last to report a major development. Regularly being first wins you awards and accolades and audiences, but being wrong is at best a kick in the gut. At its worst, it can cost a journalist his or her career and an organization its credibility. Now, you see the numerous ethics books out there and websites that say it's more important for a journalist to be right, which is what I believe, to have all the facets and, the facts and verifying the information is most important. Now, the New York Times reported several things wrong in the aftermath of the Newtown, Connecticut shooting, and this is according to Margaret Sullivan in her article on NewYorkTimes.com about being right or being first, which is more important. The New York Times, the big issue was that they reported the name of the shooter wrong. Now, that is the biggest thing that you could mess up with a story like that, and that's much concern. The New York Times and their credibility for how they report news and how many consumers they have, that is a big mistake by the New York Times. Now, talking about the flip side of this, there's a media critic named Jack Schrager in the New York Times article stated this after the Newtown shootings. In the age of Twitter, the public had better get used to a new fact of life. News stories, especially the early reports of breaking news events, are very likely to be inaccurate. Now, that's very true. You're talking about an event happening, and all of a sudden, 30 seconds to a minute later, there's already tweets on it from a couple stations. And likely, one of those stations is going to be wrong. And that's just a matter of getting information in a quick, timely fashion, but it may not be the right information. Sources, if you're out there at a scene, news information just gets jumbled up all the time. Now, some media outlets want the distinction of being first to report a major breaking story because other news outlets would feed off their information and gain much credit for getting the story out quicker than anyone else. Now, that's just a matter of the day of age. Like we said, social media, having news at the tips of your fingers and being notified just as it happens. Big news outlets like to be first, and that's just the way it is. There's no really good way to describe it, but it's a bit of credibility, I guess, on their part to want to be first. Now, let's have an example of this come up, and this came up with the Associated Press Twitter account in 2013 in April when hackers took over the Twitter account. Hackers posted and claimed there were explosions at the White House and that Barack Obama, the president, was hurt at the time. The tweet was up for a couple of minutes and was retweeted over 3,000 times in such a little bit of time span. Now, Twitter removed the count after, and the AP confirmed the news was false. The stock market took a skydive by 143 points before climbing back up once it was removed. Now, this has to do somewhat with what we're talking about. It's showing how a tweet, if it's a wrong one, can make an impact. And for consumers, showing the Associated Press and their credibility and all that, they obviously tweeted something wrong, they thought, and that caused a lot of havoc and a little bit of worry on the account of the White House and the president and his status. But again, it was a fake story. Twitter did what they could to correct it, and the Associated Press came out after and said the news was false. Now, this quote comes from Heather Kelly in the article, and she says, "Real tweets have the power to end careers, cause diplomatic tensions, and fuel revolution. Fake tweets can have the same ripple effects. Damage control is difficult. There is no way to edit or append a correction to a tweet. And once it has been retweeted, those 140 characters take on a life of their own." So in my opinion, I've talked about it before, social media has changed journalism faster than professionals predicted it, and it has affected their reporting process and ethics. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory. You talk about the emergence of social media and just changing the way journalism is today. Again, now that you have social media, people want their news fast, but they also want it correct. My opinion, too, on the issue of being right or being first, it's more important to be right. Ethics state that journalists need to be right. Their facts have to be verified. Now, Twitter is the social media site that has the biggest risk for mistakes, in my opinion. You only have a limited amount of information that you can put in a tweet, 140 characters. Any slip up in a typo, any sort of miswording that can happen due to the fact that you don't have as many characters to work with, That can be a possible mistake for journalists, and again, it could cost them their career, like some of our experts have talked about in this presentation. And Twitter has its advantages over other social media websites, and that's because, like I said, in my personal experience, when you have the ability to get news right at your fingertips, you get a notification right away when somebody tweets out about a story, that is important because Facebook really can't do that. They only really have notifications for when live videos go on and things of that nature, but Twitter is fast to get you the news right away. So these are my sources, and it's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.